ICRA, Infection Control Risk Assessment, Wright-Patterson Medical Center Review. Goals: understand the chain of infection, be aware of hospital-acquired infections, or HAIs, be knowledgeable about infection control risk assessment procedures for properly performing healthcare construction and renovation tasks. And finally, examine the practical use of ICRA tools, including containment, negative air, HEPA filtration, and work practice techniques. A series of events has to happen to enable germs to cause infections in a person. We call this the chain of infection. We can think of each part of the process as a separate link in the chain. And if we can break a link at any part of the chain, we can stop infection arising. The first part of the chain of infection is the pathogen. A pathogen causes disease. A pathogen can be a fungus, a mold, a parasite, or a virus. Mold releases spores that can become airborne when disturbed by activities such as renovation, maintenance, and construction work. Spores are easily inhaled and can cause health problems in people who come in contact with them. Bacteria are single-cell organisms. They can be resistant to antibiotics and can be easily transmitted through the air, on contaminated surfaces, and from person to person. Viruses are not considered living organisms and can cause minor illnesses like, say, the common cold, or life-threatening infections such as liver infections from hepatitis B. Common pathogens that worry hospitals, especially when disturbed by construction activities, are Aspergillus and Legionella. Aspergillus is the most common cause of construction-related hospital-acquired infections, or HAIs. Hospital-acquired infections, also known as nosocomial infections, are infections that patients get while receiving treatment for medical or surgical conditions.
Aspergillus is a group of around 200 known fungi. The Aspergillus family has many practical applications in industry, from fermentation to biomass energy. Other strains are known to be detrimental to humans. Aspergillus niger is known to cause black mold and is found on most surfaces in varying quantities. It is found in highest density in soil and on organic materials such as rotting leaves, and it is transferred in both airborne form and by hand. Exposure to Aspergillus can lead to a group of diseases collectively known as aspergillosis. This can affect patients whose immune system may be compromised, such as those with chronic granulomatous disease, leukemia, cystic fibrosis, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, severe asthmatic fungal sensitivity, HIV, AIDS, and chemotherapy and transplant patients. Symptoms of aspergillosis usually include respiratory difficulties or exacerbation of existing symptoms such as asthma. Infections can lead to fungi growing inside the lungs and sinuses, causing chronic coughing, blocked sinuses, and headaches. Infection has been known to spread throughout the bloodstream to other organs such as the heart and cause fatalities, although this is rare. Seeking to prevent the breakout by minimizing dampness and using antimicrobial building materials is key to reducing the outbreaks of Aspergillus. Regular cleaning using bleach-based cleaners and appropriately disposing of waste where Aspergillus can grow should then minimize the inevitable growth from airborne spores.
Legionella is a bacterium that can cause Legionnaire's disease, are legionellosis. Let's see what the CDC has to say. The next part of the chain of infection is the reservoir. The reservoir is where the pathogen lives. Pathogens typically live behind drywall, in ceilings, in ductwork, in plumbing, and in cooling towers. Next in the chain of infection is the portal of exit. Portal of exit means how the pathogen is released into the ambient air. Examples include openings in walls, doors, ductwork, ceilings, and plumbing. Next in the chain of infection is mode of transmission. Mode of transmission refers to how a pathogen moves or is carried from one place to another. Pathogens can become airborne through common activities such as tearing out carpet, grinding, moving ceiling tiles, or cutting into a wall. Pathogens can be in the water. A water supply system can become contaminated in a variety of ways, such as sediment buildup in plumbing, stagnant water, or backed up sewer. Pathogens can be on surfaces and transferred by skin or clothing coming into contact with a surface that is contaminated. Next, in the chain of infection, we have the portal of entry. A portal of entry is the site through which pathogens enter a person and cause disease/infection. Pathogens enter the body through various portals, including the mucous membranes, the skin, and the respiratory and gastrointestinal tracts. Next, in the chain of infection, we have susceptible host. A susceptible host is a person who has little resistance against a particular pathogen and who, if exposed to this pathogen, is likely to contract a hospital-acquired infection. Examples of susceptible hosts include pregnant women, newborns, the elderly, and cancer patients. So, what happens when we have an unbroken chain and infection risks are not managed?
Just as the nurse was about to put down the white padding that was over my incision, my mother said, "Wait a minute, there's something on her stomach. Looked like a mole." And my mother asked the nurse to call the doctor to come back, and she didn't want to. She said, "I am not going to call the doctor for what's going to turn out to be nothing." My mother said, "I'll call the doctor." I'll never forget, I was looking at my doctor and I raised the gauze and I just saw his face completely change. And when I looked down at my abdomen, the black dot was gone and there was a quarter-sized pustule. The infection kept spreading and it was starting to go down my leg. Over 2 million patients a year get hospital-acquired infections. I ended up having 6 more surgeries, 9 blood transfusions. I left the hospital with an open abdomen that took 3 years to close. My hospital, they were cited for being in violation of 5 state laws and 10 federal laws for unsanitary conditions in their operating rooms. It took me
10 years of almost weekly physical therapy to get back to a new normal life.
What can we do as construction professionals to protect the public while working in a hospital?
For indoor construction, the ICRA considers the location, the type and extent of activities, the potential impact on areas above, below, and immediately surrounding the work site, including adjacent patient care areas, common areas, and travel routes. Those units served by the same ventilation system and the impact of heavy, noisy equipment.
In order to identify the containment measures needed for a project, Step 1 of the ICRA defines the type of construction project in terms of how much dust and dirt are likely to be generated. Type A or minimal dust projects include inspections and non-invasive activities, such as removing ceiling tiles for inspection, painting with no sanding, wall covering, electrical trim work, and minor plumbing repair projects. Type B or easily controlled dust-generating projects include sanding with dustless equipment, cutting of walls or ceilings, installation of a single telephone and computer cable, and brief access to chase spaces. Type C or moderate high dust generation projects include sanding of walls, removal of multiple ceiling tiles, floor coverings, or fixed building components, new wall construction, major cabling activities, and minor duct and electrical work above ceilings. And Type D or high dust construction projects have long-term dust generating activity, such as major demolition, new construction and renovation, and work that requires completion in multiple steps or phases. Once the project activity has been defined, Step 2 of the ICRA identifies the patient risk group. This is the group of patients most likely to be affected by the type of construction or renovation activity identified in Step 1. Patient groups are ranked from those at highest risk of infection to those at lowest risk, based on the patient care area.
Remember to consider areas that provide support for patient care. If these areas become contaminated from construction activity, the products or materials produced and distributed by these areas could transmit microorganisms to patients. Therefore, areas such as sterile processing, food preparation, central supply, and pharmacy will require similar assessments and protection from dirt and dust.
Once the ICRA has identified the class of precautions, an infection control risk mitigation recommendation is made. This is a job-specific work plan that considers the need for either fixed or mobile containment barriers, anterooms, engineering controls for ventilation, and other special protocols for optimal dust and debris control.
All critical barriers, including containment units, must be in place, and the maintenance of pressure relationships and effectiveness of containment barriers verified by the site supervisor before construction begins. Critical barriers must also be monitored by the facility and contractor for the duration of the project. The ICRA also identifies the accountability of individuals during implementation. The ICRA should establish the frequency and type of documentation prior to the start of the project, even on work orders for routine repair and maintenance tasks. For a project labeled Class 1, the key is to minimize the raising of dust and keep the area clean. Doors should be kept closed to the work area and ceiling tiles replaced immediately after visual inspection. Class 2 requires active means to prevent airborne dust and dirt from dispersing into the atmosphere, such as sealing air vents or using dustless equipment. Drop cloths may be used to cover exposed surfaces, and HEPA vacuums or wet mops should be used as appropriate to control dust. Class 2 projects may also need barriers to contain dust. For example, fire-rated plastic sheeting and tape, or portable containment units may be used to seal off access to the work area. HEPA units may also be needed to contain dust. The site should be tested to ensure air flows into rather than out of the area.
If ceiling tiles are removed, they should be assessed carefully for leaks or stains that may indicate fungal contamination. The potential for contamination and the risk to the nearby patient population, rather than the number of tiles to be removed, may determine the need for a containment unit. This should be a standard of the organization.
Class 3 projects that generate moderate to high levels of dust require more intensive dust control measures. For example, barriers may be portable units or rigid walls that are sealed or caulked at the seams, and depending on official requirements may need to be fire rated. Holes, pipes, and conduits should also be sealed. Plastic sheeting may be used to seal off access to the work area while the barriers are being constructed and removed. Class 4 projects that are large and very dusty combine all the previous activities and add maximum infection control barriers to prevent dust or dirt from escaping the area. This requires careful planning to create containment barriers without creating a hazard, and the possible need for an anteroom so that workers may enter, leave, and change clothes without contaminating patient areas. Anterooms also facilitate waste removal and tool storage. Dust and debris can also leave a worksite on tools. Tools and equipment should be either damp wiped or vacuumed before exiting the worksite. Since clothing can also carry dust, the ICRA should address how clothing contamination will be controlled. Clothing must be free of dust and debris before leaving a work area and entering a clean zone. During typical Class 3 or 4 projects, workers will either need to put on disposable cloth or paper coveralls or use a HEPA vacuum on clothing before entering a clean zone. The use of an adhesive walk-off mat is one method of controlling dust at the entrance and exit of work areas. One or more mats should be used to capture debris from the workers' feet or from a full revolution of debris container wheels. These mats should be changed daily or more often based on the use and amount of dirt. Or assign a worker to damp mop the exit and traffic pathways as required to control dust and dirt. Debris that is to be removed from the worksite should be enclosed in tightly covered containers. Before transport, receptacles or carts should be wiped down, covered, and closed. Debris should be removed from the site daily, at prearranged times of minimum patient traffic, and using designated elevators and pathways which are routed away from patient care areas.
Conclusion. Pathogens cause disease. Common pathogens found in hospitals are Aspergillus and Legionella. These pathogens live in walls, ceilings, pipes, and ductwork. Construction activities can disturb these pathogens. These pathogens are transported in air, water, and/or on clothing and tools. The consequences are dire if these pathogens have an opportunity to interact with the sick and compromised. Barriers, negative air, good housekeeping, and thoughtful planning will help prevent these pathogens from making sick people sicker or worse. Remember, we are not in direct contact with the patients, but how we do our work affects whether we indirectly expose patients to dangerous pathogens found in dust, mold, and water.